The rain was coming down in sheets that November evening when I finally made my decision. I was 14 years old, sitting on the edge of my narrow bed in the Riverside Children's Home, listening to the sounds of the other kids settling in for the night. But I wouldn't be there come morning. I had been at Riverside for almost 3 years, ever since my mother's boyfriend had decided that raising someone else's kid wasn't part of his life plan. My mother had chosen him over me, and just like that I became a ward of the state. The system had shuffled me between foster homes and group facilities, and Riverside was my 4th placement. It wasn't the worst place I'd been, but it wasn't home either. Nothing had been home since I was 11. The staff at Riverside weren't cruel, but they were overwhelmed. 32 kids ranging from ages 6 to 17, and only 4 full-time counselors trying to manage everyone's trauma, behavioral issues, and basic needs. We were fed, clothed, and sent to school, but that was about where the care ended. I had learned quickly that in places like this, you kept your head down, didn't make waves, and counted the days until you aged out of the system. But lately, something had shifted inside me. I couldn't explain it exactly, just a growing sense that if I stayed, I would lose whatever spark of hope I still carried. I would become like some of the older kids, hollow-eyed and resigned, just marking time until they were released into a world they weren't prepared for. So I planned. For 3 weeks, I had been squirreling away food from the cafeteria, taking extra granola bars and packets of crackers, hiding them in my backpack. I had $73 saved from odd jobs I'd done around the facility, helping in the kitchen or doing yard work for extra privileges that came with small cash rewards. It wasn't much, but it was something. I had studied the security routines, knew that the overnight supervisor, Mr. Patterson, did his rounds at 10:30 and then usually fell asleep in the office by midnight. The emergency exit on the east side of the building had a faulty alarm that maintenance kept meaning to fix but never got around to. I had tested it twice during fire drills, slipping out briefly to confirm it wouldn't sound. That night, I lay fully clothed under my blanket wearing 2 shirts, my warmest hoodie, and my only pair of jeans that didn't have holes. My backpack was already packed with everything I owned that mattered, which wasn't much. A few changes of clothes, my stash of food, a water bottle, a flashlight, the money, and 1 photograph. The picture showed me at age 8 with my mother at some county fair. We were both smiling, standing in front of a Ferris wheel, and her arm was around my shoulders. It was the only photograph I had from before everything fell apart, and even though looking at it hurt, I couldn't leave it behind. At 12:15, I heard Mr. Patterson's distinctive snoring echoing from down the hallway. I waited another 10 minutes to be sure, then slowly sat up. My roommate, a kid named Danny, who was only 7, was sound asleep, clutching his stuffed dinosaur. I felt a pang of guilt about leaving without saying goodbye to anyone, but I couldn't risk it. If anyone knew, they might try to stop me or worse, tell the staff. I shouldered my backpack as quietly as possible and crept toward the door. The old hardwood floors creaked with every step, and my heart was hammering so hard I was sure someone would hear it. But I made it to the hallway without incident. The corridor was dimly lit by emergency exit signs, casting everything in an eerie red glow. I moved slowly, carefully, avoiding the spots I knew were particularly noisy. The east exit was at the far end of the building, past the common room and the kitchen. When I finally reached it, I pressed my ear against the door, listening for any sounds from outside. Nothing but the steady drumming of rain. I took a deep breath, whispered a prayer to nobody in particular, and pushed the door open. The cold hit me immediately, along with the rain that was still pouring down relentlessly. I stepped out into the night and eased the door closed behind me. No alarm sounded. I was free, or at least as free as a 14-year-old runaway with no plan and nowhere to go could be. I pulled my hood up and started walking, staying close to the building until I reached the tree line that bordered the facility's property. Once I was among the trees, I allowed myself to look back one time. The Riverside Children's Home sat there, a large brick building with warm lights glowing in a few windows. Part of me wanted to run back inside, crawl into my bed, and pretend I had never left. But I turned away and kept walking. I had no destination in mind, just a vague sense that I needed to get as far away as possible before morning. The town of Riverside was small, maybe 8,000 people, surrounded by farmland and forest. I stuck to back roads and avoided the main streets where someone might spot me. The rain was both a blessing and a curse. It meant fewer people would be out, but it also meant I was getting thoroughly soaked despite my hood. By the time I reached the edge of town, probably around 2 in the morning, I was shivering uncontrollably. I needed to find shelter soon or risk hypothermia. That's when I saw the old barn, set back from the road behind what appeared to be an abandoned farmhouse. The house itself was clearly uninhabitable, with broken windows and a sagging porch, but the barn looked relatively intact. I made my way across the overgrown yard, my shoes squelching in the mud, and found the barn door standing partially open. Inside, it smelled of old hay and weathered wood, but it was dry. I used my flashlight to explore, finding an old hayloft that was accessible by a rickety ladder. The loft still had some hay bales stacked in the corner, and while they were old and musty, they would provide insulation from the cold. I climbed up, arranged some of the hay into a makeshift bed, and curled up in the driest corner I could find, using my backpack as a pillow. I must have fallen asleep from sheer exhaustion because, when I opened my eyes, pale morning light was filtering through the gaps in the barn's wooden walls. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then reality came crashing back. I was a runaway, soaking wet, freezing cold, and hiding in an abandoned barn with no idea what to do next. I sat up slowly, my muscles stiff from sleeping on the hay, and assessed my situation. My clothes were still damp. I was hungry, and I needed to figure out my next move before someone discovered me. The farm appeared to have been abandoned for years. Through a gap in the barn wall, I could see the farmhouse more clearly in the daylight. It was a 2-story structure that might have been beautiful once, with a wraparound porch and dormer windows, but time and neglect had taken their toll. The white paint was peeling away in long strips, several windows were broken, and the front steps had partially collapsed. I climbed down from the loft carefully, testing each rung of the ladder before putting my full weight on it. My stomach was growling, so I pulled out one of my granola bars and ate it slowly, trying to make it last. I had maybe 2 weeks' worth of food if I rationed carefully, but then what? I couldn't survive indefinitely on stolen snacks. I needed a real plan. The problem was, I had run away without thinking much beyond the act of escaping itself. Where could a 14-year-old go with no family, no resources, and no legal right to be anywhere? If I went to another town, I'd eventually need to enroll in school, and that would require documentation I didn't have. The authorities would find me within days. If I tried to get a job, same problem. I was trapped in a situation of my own making, and the weight of that realization was crushing. I spent that first day hiding in the barn, venturing out only to explore the immediate area and make sure no one was around. The farm seemed to be at least 20 acres, mostly overgrown fields and scattered trees. There was an old chicken coop that had collapsed on one side, a rusted tractor sitting in tall grass, and what looked like it had once been a vegetable garden, now completely overrun with weeds. A gravel driveway connected the property to the road, but it was so overgrown that it was barely visible. Clearly no one had lived here or maintained the place in a very long time. That night, I made my second mistake. I decided to explore the farmhouse. I told myself I was just looking for supplies, maybe a blanket or something useful, but truthfully, I was lonely and scared, and the barn felt too isolated. I approached the house cautiously, listening for any signs of life, then tried the back door. It was locked, but the door frame was so rotted that a firm push caused the whole thing to give way with a splintering crack that sounded impossibly loud in the quiet evening. Inside, the house was a time capsule of abandonment. There was still furniture in most rooms, covered in dust and cobwebs. The kitchen had dishes in the cabinets, pots hanging from hooks, even some canned goods in the pantry that were so old the labels had faded to nothing. In the living room, there were photographs on the mantel showing a family. A man and woman, maybe in their 50s, and what appeared to be their adult children with families of their own. Holiday gatherings, birthday celebrations, ordinary moments frozen in time. I wondered what had happened to them, why they had left this place to decay. Upstairs I found 3 bedrooms. The master bedroom had a large bed with a faded quilt still on it. One room appeared to have belonged to a young boy, with model airplanes hanging from the ceiling and posters of baseball players from what looked like the 1980s. The third room was clearly a guest room, with neutral decor and a single bed. I knew I shouldn't stay in the house. If someone came to check on the property, the barn would be easier to hide in, but the guest room bed was calling to me. I hadn't slept in a real bed in years, not since before I entered the system. At Riverside, we had thin mattresses on metal frames, and the foster homes before that hadn't been much better. This bed, even with its musty quilt and dusty pillows, represented something I had almost forgotten existed: comfort. I made a decision that would change everything. I would stay, at least for a few days, and I would treat this abandoned farm like it was mine. I would clean up the guest room, use it as my base, and figure out what to do next. It was risky, but no riskier than wandering around with nowhere to go. That evening, I found some old linens in a closet, shook them out as best I could, and made up the bed properly. I discovered that the house still had running water, though it came out rust-colored at first, and I didn't dare drink it. But I could wash my face and hands. There was no electricity, but I had my flashlight and found some old candles in a drawer. Over the next few days, I fell into a routine. I would wake up with the sun, eat a small breakfast from my dwindling supplies, and spend the day exploring the property and working on the house. I found an old push broom and swept out the guest room and the kitchen. I washed dishes in cold water and organized the pantry. I even started pulling weeds from what had been the garden, though I wasn't sure why. It just felt good to do something productive, to make some small mark on the world. But I was running out of food, and I knew I needed to venture into town soon. On my 5th day at the farm, I walked the 3 miles into Riverside, keeping my hood up and my head down. I went to the grocery store, bought bread, peanut butter, some apples, and a gallon of water, spending nearly $20 of my precious savings. The cashier, a tired-looking woman in her 40s, barely glanced at me. I was just another customer. On my way back, I passed a bulletin board outside the post office and stopped to read the notices. There, among the advertisements for piano lessons and used cars, was a flyer about me. Missing, Jacob Miller, 14 years old, last seen at Riverside Children's Home. There was my school picture from last year, the one where I looked even younger than I was, with a forced smile and uncombed hair. The flyer urged anyone with information to contact the police or child services. I stared at that picture for a long time. Jacob Miller. That was me, but it also wasn't. The boy in that photograph still had hope that someone might want him, that some family might choose him for fostering or even adoption. The person standing in front of the bulletin board knew better. I was on my own, and I always would be. I pulled the flyer down, crumpled it up, and shoved it in my pocket. Then I walked back to the farm, to the only place that had felt even remotely like home in 3 years. If you've made it this far in my story, I want to say thank you for listening. Your time means everything to me. I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever felt completely alone, like you had nowhere to turn? How did you find your way through it? And please, if this story is touching your heart, consider subscribing to the channel. There are so many more stories like this one. Stories about finding hope in unexpected places, and I want to share them all with you. Hit that subscribe button and let's build this community together. 2 weeks passed, then 3. I had been at the farm for almost a month, and somehow I was still there. The missing person flyers had disappeared from around town, replaced by newer notices about other things. other people. It seemed the authorities had moved on, or at least weren't actively searching for me anymore. I was just another runaway kid in a system that had too many of them to keep track of. I had learned to be careful, to stay out of sight, to make my trips to town infrequent and brief. I had discovered a small creek about half a mile from the farmhouse where I could get fresh water, which I boiled in an old pot I found in the kitchen using a small fire I built in the backyard, always making sure to do it at night when the smoke would be less visible. The weather was getting colder as November turned into December, and I knew I had a serious problem. The farmhouse had no heat, and my single hoodie wasn't going to be enough to get me through a Midwestern winter. I'd found some old blankets in a closet, and I slept under all of them at once, but on particularly cold nights, I could see my breath in the guest room. I needed warmer clothes, but I was down to my last $30, and I couldn't risk buying anything substantial without drawing attention. That's when I discovered the trunk in the attic. I had been avoiding the attic because the pull-down stairs looked unstable, but desperation drove me up there one afternoon. The space was cramped and dusty, filled with boxes and old furniture, but in the corner sat a large wooden trunk with brass corners. Inside, I found a treasure trove of winter clothing. Heavy wool sweaters, thermal underwear, thick socks, even an old winter coat that was too big for me but infinitely better than my thin hoodie. The clothes smelled of mothballs and age, but they were clean and intact. I also found something else in that trunk that would change everything. Beneath the clothes was a stack of letters, tied together with a faded ribbon. They were addressed to Margaret and William Patterson at this very address. I sat on the dusty attic floor and began to read, and through those letters I learned the story of the people who had lived in this house. Margaret and William had been farmers who raised corn and soybeans. They had 3 children, all of whom had moved away for better opportunities in cities far from this small town. The letters were from those children spanning decades, full of updates about grandchildren, career changes, holidays spent apart. But there was a sadness running through them too, a recurring theme of promises to visit that never quite materialized, of busy lives that left little room for the elderly parents maintaining a farm by themselves. The last letter in the stack was dated 15 years ago, from their daughter Sarah. "Mom and Dad, I know you don't want to leave the farm, but you're both in your 70s now, and it's too much for you to handle alone. Please consider the assisted living facility we talked about. It's only 40 minutes from here, and we could visit every week. The farm will always be there. You've earned the right to rest." I never found a response to that letter. But clearly, Margaret and William had eventually agreed. They had left their farm, their life's work, and moved away. And apparently, no one had ever decided what to do with the property afterward. It just sat here, slowly returning to nature, a monument to a life well lived that nobody wanted to maintain. Reading those letters did something to me. I cried for the first time since running away, sitting in that dusty attic, wearing someone else's clothes, reading about a family that had slowly drifted apart despite loving each other. I cried for Margaret and William, who had built something beautiful here and had to leave it behind. I cried for their children, who had their own lives and couldn't keep the farm going. And I cried for myself, for the family I never had, for the mother who chose someone else over me, for all the homes that were never really home. But when I was done crying, something had shifted. I made a decision that probably sounds crazy, but it made perfect sense to me in that moment. If this farm didn't belong to anyone anymore, if it was just sitting here waiting for someone to care about it, then I would be that someone. I would take care of this place. I would honor Margaret and William's memory by not letting their life's work completely disappear. I started small. I continued cleaning the house, room by room, until every surface was as clean as I could make it without proper cleaning supplies. I organized the kitchen, the living room, even the other bedrooms. I found tools in the barn and started making minor repairs, fixing a loose cabinet door here, tightening a wobbly chair leg there. I had never done any of this kind of work before, but I discovered that I had a knack for figuring things out. The farm began to respond to my care. It sounds strange to say it that way, but that's how it felt. The more attention I gave to the place, the more it seemed to welcome me. The house felt less abandoned and more like a home. The barn, once creepy and full of shadows, became my workshop where I organized tools and planned projects. Even the overgrown garden started to look less chaotic as I worked on clearing it, pulling weeds and removing dead plants, preparing it for whatever might come next. But I was still alone, and loneliness is a heavy burden to carry, especially at 14. I would go days without speaking to anyone, and I found myself talking to the house, to the photographs of Margaret and William on the mantel, even to the farm itself. I told them about my day, about my plans, about my fears. It helped, but it wasn't the same as real human connection. Then, 2 days before Christmas, something happened that would change everything. I was in the barn trying to fix a broken shelf when I heard a vehicle coming up the driveway. My heart immediately started racing. This was it. Someone had discovered me. I would be sent back to Riverside, or worse, moved to a more secure facility for running away. I quickly hid in the hayloft, peering through the gaps in the wood to see who it was. A pickup truck pulled up, old but well-maintained, and an elderly man got out. He was probably in his 70s, wearing work clothes and a heavy jacket. He stood there for a moment, looking at the farmhouse with an expression I couldn't quite read, then started walking toward it. I held my breath, trying to decide whether to run or stay hidden. That's when I heard him speak, though he seemed to be talking to himself. "Well, Margaret, I came by like I promised. Wanted to check on the place before Christmas. I know it's been a while." My mind raced. This man knew Margaret. He had been here before. He had promised to check on the farm. I watched as he walked around the property, noting the swept porch, the organized tools visible through the barn door, the cleared garden area. His expression changed from casual observation to confusion, then to concern. "That's odd," he said aloud, still seemingly talking to himself. "Someone's been here recently, by the looks of it." He approached the back door, saw that it had been forced open, and his concern deepened. He pulled out a cell phone, and I knew I had seconds to make a decision. I could hide and let him call the police, which would end with me being discovered eventually anyway, or I could show myself and try to explain. Neither option was good, but at least the second one gave me some control over the situation. Before I could talk myself out of it, I climbed down from the hayloft and stepped out of the barn. The man spun around, his hand instinctively going to his phone. We stood there, staring at each other across the yard. He was a large man, tall and broad-shouldered despite his age, with a weathered face that spoke of years spent outdoors. His expression cycled through surprise, confusion, and then something that might have been understanding. "Please don't call the police," I said, my voice sounding smaller than I intended. "I'll leave. I'll go right now. I just need a few minutes to get my things." He didn't move, didn't speak, just kept looking at me with those sharp blue eyes. Finally, he lowered his phone and said, "How long have you been here, son?" The kindness in his voice almost broke me. "About 5 weeks," I admitted. "I didn't damage anything, I swear. I've been taking care of the place. I've been cleaning and fixing things. I just needed somewhere to stay." He was quiet for a long moment, processing this information. Then he asked, "Are you the boy from the children's home, Jacob Miller?" My heart sank. He knew who I was. Of course he did. Everyone in this small town probably knew about the missing kid from Riverside. I nodded, unable to speak. To my surprise, he didn't immediately reach for his phone again. Instead, he said, "I'm Tom Henderson. I was a friend of the Pattersons, the people who owned this farm. I promised Margaret before she died that I'd check on the place from time to time. Clearly, I haven't been doing a very good job of it, if you've been here for 5 weeks without me noticing." Tom Henderson walked slowly toward me, his hands visible and non-threatening, as if he were approaching a skittish animal. "Why don't you show me what you've been doing here?" he said quietly. "Then we can figure out what happens next." I led him through the farmhouse, showing him the rooms I had cleaned, the repairs I had made, the way I had organized things. He didn't say much, just nodded occasionally, and examined my work with what seemed like a professional eye. When we reached the guest room where I had been sleeping, he paused at the doorway, taking in the neatly made bed, my few possessions arranged carefully on the dresser, the clothes hanging in the closet. "You've been living like this for 5 weeks?" he asked, and there was something in his voice that sounded like sadness. "In the cold, with no electricity, no proper food." I shrugged, trying to appear tougher than I felt. "It's better than where I was." He turned to look at me then, really look at me, and I saw something shift in his expression. "Come on," he said. "Let's go sit in my truck where it's warm, and you can tell me your story." We sat in his pickup with the heater running, and for the first time in 5 weeks, I felt genuinely warm. Tom didn't pressure me, just waited patiently until I was ready to talk. And then, somehow, everything came spilling out. I told him about my mother and her boyfriend, about entering the system at 11, about the foster homes that didn't work out, about Riverside, and the overwhelming feeling that I was disappearing into a system that didn't see me as a person, just a case file. I told him about finding the farm, about discovering Margaret and William's letters, about deciding to take care of the place because no one else seemed to want it. When I finished, Tom was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "Margaret Patterson was one of the finest people I ever knew. She and William both were. They loved this farm more than anything, except maybe their kids and grandkids. It broke their hearts when they had to leave." He paused, looking out at the farmhouse. "Their daughter Sarah inherited the place when they passed. She's been meaning to do something with it for years, sell it or fix it up, but she lives in Seattle now with her own family, and it keeps getting pushed to the bottom of her priority list. So it just sits here, slowly falling apart." "I'm sorry I broke in," I said. "I just didn't have anywhere else to go." Tom shook his head. "I'm not worried about that. What I'm worried about is what happens to you now. You know I should call child services, right? You're a minor, and you ran away from a state facility. That's serious." I felt tears welling up, but I fought them back. "Please don't send me back there. I know I can't stay here forever. I know this isn't my farm, but please just give me a few more days, just through Christmas. After that, I'll turn myself in, I promise. I just can't go back there on Christmas." Something in my plea must have reached him, because he sighed deeply and rubbed his face with both hands. "Let me make a phone call," he said. "Stay here." He got out of the truck and walked a short distance away, his phone to his ear. I watched him through the windshield, seeing him gesture as he talked, his expression serious. The conversation went on for at least 15 minutes, and with each passing moment, my anxiety grew. Finally, he came back to the truck and climbed in. "Okay," he said, "here's what's going to happen. That was Sarah Patterson I just called. I told her about you, about what you've been doing here, and about your situation. She's going to call child services herself and explain that she's temporarily allowing you to stay on the property under supervision while they figure out a better placement for you. I'm going to be that supervision." I stared at him, not quite believing what I was hearing. "What does that mean?" Tom explained. "It means that for now you're not going back to Riverside. Sarah was actually moved by what you've done here, taking care of her parents' place. She said if someone cares enough about the farm to fix it up, they deserve a chance to stay a while longer. But there are conditions. You have to agree to work with a social worker. You have to go back to school after the holidays, and you have to stay out of trouble. Can you do that?" "Yes," I said immediately. "I can do all of that." He held up a hand. "I'm not finished. You also can't stay here alone anymore. It's not safe, and it's not legal. So you're going to stay with me and my wife Ruth for now. We live about 10 miles from here, and we've got a spare room. During the day, if you want, you can come here and keep working on the farm. I'll help you. I'm retired now, and I could use a project. But at night, you come home to our place. Understood?" I couldn't speak. This man, this stranger, was offering me more than anyone had offered me in 3 years. A place to stay, supervision that didn't feel like incarceration, and the chance to keep working on the farm that had become important to me. "Why?" I finally managed to ask. "Why would you do this for me?" Tom looked at me with those kind blue eyes and said, Because Margaret and William would have wanted someone to help you. Because I know what it's like to feel like you don't belong anywhere. And because sometimes people need someone to take a chance on them. I'm taking a chance on you, Jacob. Don't make me regret it. That afternoon, Tom took me to his house, a modest ranch-style home with a well-kept yard and Christmas lights twinkling along the roofline. His wife Ruth was a small woman with grey hair and a warm smile, and she welcomed me without hesitation or judgment. "You must be freezing and starving," she said immediately. Come in, come in. I've got stew on the stove and fresh bread just out of the oven." The smell of that food, real homemade food, almost made me cry. Ruth showed me to their spare room, which had clearly been prepared in the short time since Tom's phone call. There was a comfortable bed with clean sheets, a dresser with some clothes laid out that looked about my size, and even some books on the nightstand. "These were our son's," Ruth explained. "He's grown now, living in Denver, but I kept some of his things. I think they'll fit you well enough until we can get you your own." That night, I sat at their dinner table and ate the best meal I had eaten in years. Tom and Ruth didn't interrogate me or make me feel like a charity case. They just talked about normal things, about their son, about the town, about their plans for Christmas. They included me in the conversation, as if I had always been there, as if I belonged. After dinner, Ruth showed me how to use the shower, gave me fresh towels, and told me to take as long as I wanted. I stood under that hot water until it started to run cold, watching 3 years of accumulated loneliness and fear wash down the drain. When I finally emerged, wrapped in a borrowed robe, I found Ruth had laid out pajamas on my bed. Real pajamas, not just clothes to sleep in, but actual pajamas that were soft and warm. I climbed into bed that night in a real bedroom, in a real home, with real people who had chosen to help me despite having no obligation to do so. I could hear Tom and Ruth talking quietly in their room down the hall, the kind of comfortable conversation that comes from years of partnership. The house made settling sounds around me, the creak of cooling wood, the hum of the furnace, all the small noises that make a structure feel alive and inhabited. For the first time since I could remember, I felt safe. The next morning, I woke to the smell of breakfast cooking. I got dressed quickly in the clothes Ruth had left for me, jeans and a warm flannel shirt, both fitting reasonably well. When I entered the kitchen, Tom was already at the table reading the newspaper, and Ruth was at the stove making pancakes. "Good morning, Jacob," she said brightly. "I hope you like blueberry pancakes. Tom can't get enough of them." It was so normal, so ordinary, that I almost couldn't process it. Over breakfast, Tom laid out the plan. "We've got about a week before you need to start school. Today I'm going to take you to the farm, and we're going to make a list of what needs to be done. Real repairs, not just cleaning. I've got tools and materials, and I know how to use them. If you're serious about taking care of that place, we're going to do it right." I nodded eagerly. "I want to learn. I want to make it good again." Tom smiled. "That's what I wanted to hear. But first, we need to go into town and get you properly registered with Child Services. Sarah Patterson has already called them and explained the situation, but we need to make it official. You'll meet with a social worker, probably someone named Mrs. Chen. She's tough but fair. Just be honest with her. Tell her what you told me, and we'll see what happens." The meeting with Mrs. Chen went better than I expected. She was a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes that seemed to see right through any pretense, but Tom had been right about her being fair. She listened to my story without interrupting, took notes, and asked questions that showed she was actually listening, not just going through the motions. "Jacob," she said when I finished, "what you did was dangerous and illegal. Running away from a state facility is serious, and you put yourself at tremendous risk. You could have frozen to death, gotten hurt with no one to help you, or worse." I nodded, accepting the truth of her words. "I know, I'm sorry. I just couldn't stay there anymore. I felt like I was disappearing." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "I understand that feeling more than you might think. The system isn't perfect, and sometimes kids fall through the cracks. But here's the reality. You're 14 years old. You need stability, education, and supervision. Mr. and Mrs. Henderson have offered to provide emergency foster care for you while we work out a more permanent solution. That's extraordinarily generous of them, and it's not something that happens often. But this arrangement only works if you hold up your end. That means going to school, following their rules, meeting with me twice a month, and proving that you can be responsible. Can you do that? Yes, ma'am, I said firmly. I can do all of that and more. She smiled slightly. I believe you might actually mean that. Okay, here's what's going to happen. You'll stay with the Hendersons under a temporary foster arrangement. We'll enroll you in school after the winter break. You'll continue seeing me regularly, and we'll evaluate the situation in 3 months. If everything goes well, we can discuss more permanent options. If it doesn't work out, you'll be placed in another facility, possibly one with more restrictions given your flight risk. Do you understand? I understood perfectly. This was my chance, maybe my only chance, to have something resembling a normal life. I wasn't going to waste it. The week between Christmas and New Year's became a turning point in my life. Every morning, Tom would drive me to the farm, and we would work together on repairs and improvements. He taught me how to use tools properly, how to measure twice and cut once, how to approach a problem methodically instead of just hoping for the best. We fixed the broken back door frame, replaced several rotted boards on the porch, patched holes in the barn roof, and started planning more ambitious projects for the spring. But more than the practical skills, Tom taught me something more important. He taught me that I had value, that my work mattered, that I was capable of creating something meaningful. Every time I successfully completed a repair or solved a problem, he would nod approvingly and say something like, "Good work, Jacob. You've got a real talent for this." Those simple words of affirmation fed something in me that had been starving for years. Ruth, meanwhile, worked on making me feel like part of their family. She took me shopping for proper clothes, not just hand-me-downs, but new jeans and shirts and a winter coat that actually fit. She taught me how to cook simple meals and insisted I help with household chores, not as punishment, but as a member of the household contributing to its maintenance. "Everyone who lives here has responsibilities," she explained. "That's what makes it a home instead of a hotel." On Christmas Eve, they gave me presents: a new pair of work gloves, a good flashlight, a journal with my initials embossed on the cover, and a framed photograph. The photograph showed the farm as it had looked decades ago, with Margaret and William standing in front of the house, both smiling proudly. "I found that in some old boxes," Tom explained. "I thought you might like to have it, to remember what the place meant to the people who built it." I couldn't hold back the tears then. I cried in front of these people who had become more of a family to me in 2 weeks than anyone had been in years. Ruth hugged me while Tom looked away politely, giving me space to feel what I needed to feel. "You're not alone anymore, Jacob," Ruth whispered. "You're part of our family now, for as long as you need us." After the holidays, I started school at Riverside High. It was terrifying walking into that building, knowing that everyone probably knew who I was, the runaway kid from the children's home. But Tom and Ruth had prepared me for this. "Hold your head up," Tom had advised. "You made a mistake, but you're fixing it. That takes courage. Anyone who can't see that isn't worth your time." The first few weeks were hard. Some kids whispered and pointed, and I heard orphan and runaway muttered more than once. But I kept my head down, focused on my schoolwork, and gradually people lost interest in me. I wasn't dramatic enough to sustain their attention. I was just another kid trying to get through the day. I made a friend in English class, a girl named Emma who was new to the area and didn't know anything about my history. She just saw me as the quiet guy who was good at writing essays. We started having lunch together, talking about books and movies and normal teenage things. And slowly, I began to feel like maybe I could have a regular life after all. Tom and I continued working on the farm every weekend and most afternoons after school. As winter turned to spring, we tackled bigger projects. We repainted the entire exterior of the house, a massive job that took weeks. We fixed the fence around the property, replaced all the broken windows, and completely rebuilt the front porch steps. The farm was transforming before our eyes, returning to something resembling its former glory. Sarah Patterson called every few weeks to check on our progress, and she was amazed by what we were accomplishing. "You've done more in a few months than I could have imagined," she told Tom during one call that I overheard. "That place was breaking my heart, watching it deteriorate. Knowing someone cares enough to save it means everything to me." In April, about 5 months after Tom had found me in the barn, Mrs. Chen came for one of her regular check-ins. She walked through the farm with us, seeing all the work we had done, then sat down with me privately. "Jacob, I've been watching your progress closely. Your teachers say you're doing well in school. The Hendersons speak highly of you, and clearly you've been pouring your heart into this place. I think it's time we talked about making your placement with Tom and Ruth permanent." My heart started racing. "What does that mean exactly?" She smiled. "It means that if everyone agrees, the Hendersons would become your official foster parents, not just emergency placement. You would stay with them long-term, through high school at least, with the possibility of adoption, if that's something all of you want down the road." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "They would want that, to keep me permanently?" Mrs. Chen laughed gently. "Jacob, they've already filled out the paperwork. They wanted to wait to tell you until I gave my approval, which I'm doing now. So the question isn't whether they want you. The question is whether you want this." Did I want this? Did I want to stay with two people who had shown me more kindness in 5 months than I had experienced in 3 years in the system? Did I want to keep working on a farm that had become my purpose and passion? Did I want to finally have something that felt like home? "Yes," I said, my voice breaking. "Yes, I want this more than anything." That evening, Tom and Ruth officially asked me if I would like to stay with them as their foster son, with the potential for adoption when I turned 16, if we all felt it was right. I said yes through tears of joy, and Ruth cried too, and even Tom's eyes looked suspiciously moist. We celebrated with Ruth's famous pot roast and apple pie, and for the first time in my life, I understood what it meant to belong somewhere. The farm continued to be a central part of my life. Tom and I worked on it every week, and as I got older and more skilled, I took on more of the planning and execution myself. Sarah Patterson eventually deeded the property to a land trust with the stipulation that I would be allowed to maintain it and even live there someday if I chose, as thanks for saving her parents' legacy. I'm 17 now, about to start my senior year of high school. I live with Tom and Ruth, who adopted me last year on my 16th birthday, making it official in every way that matters. I have friends at school, decent grades, and plans to study agriculture and property restoration in college. But more importantly, I have a family. Not the one I was born into and not the one I thought I would have, but the one I found in the most unexpected place. The farm where I once hid in fear and desperation is now a place of pride and purpose. Tom and I have restored it to nearly its original condition, and we've even started small-scale farming, growing vegetables that Ruth sells at the local farmers market. It's become a community project, with neighbors stopping by to see the progress and share memories of Margaret and William. Sometimes I think about that scared 14-year-old boy who broke into an abandoned farmhouse on a rainy November night with nowhere else to go. I think about how desperate he was, how alone, how convinced that no one would ever want him or care about him. I wish I could go back and tell him that he was wrong, that he just hadn't found his people yet. Because that's what I learned through all of this. Family isn't always the people you're born to. Sometimes it's the people who choose you, who see value in you when you can't see it yourself, who give you a chance when you don't deserve one. Tom and Ruth didn't have to help me. They could have called the police that day and washed their hands of a troubled runaway kid, but they chose differently. They chose to see potential instead of problems, possibility instead of risk, and in return, I've tried every day to be worthy of that choice. I've worked hard, stayed out of trouble, and poured my energy into positive things like the farm and my education. But more than that, I've learned to accept love when it's offered, to believe that I deserve good things, to trust that not everyone will abandon me. The old oak tree that stands at the edge of the property has become my favorite spot to sit and think. From there, I can see the whole farm, the house with its fresh paint, the barn with its repaired roof, the garden where we grow tomatoes and corn and beans. I can see the life that Tom and Ruth have built here, and the life they've helped me build too. Sometimes I sit there and imagine Margaret and William looking down on what we've done with their place, and I hope they're proud. I hope they know that their farm didn't die when they left it, that it just needed someone to believe in it again. Thank you so much for staying with me through this entire journey. If my story touched your heart in any way, I would be so grateful if you would subscribe to this channel. There are so many more stories about finding hope, about second chances, about the unexpected ways life can surprise us, and I want to share all of them with you. But more than that, I want to hear your stories too. Have you ever been given a second chance by someone who didn't have to help you? Have you found family in unexpected places? Please share your experiences in the comments below. This community is built on our shared stories, our common struggles, and our collective hope that things can get better. And let me ask you this: what did you learn from my story? What truth resonated with you? I'd love to know. Thank you for being here, for listening, for caring. Until next time, remember that sometimes the most beautiful things in life come from the most broken places, and that you're never as alone as you think you are.